Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Shanley, Representative McAtee, members of the committee. I return before you this evening to offer testimony in support of H5171. By way of introduction or reintroduction, as the case may be, my name is Hub Brennan. I'm now 61 years old. I grew up in, live in, work in the town of East Greenwich. I'm an internal medicine doctor in private practice and have been for over 25 years. I've been civically involved my entire adult life. I've served on any number of local, statewide, national, and international boards and commissions. I'm a former assistant chief of the East Greenwich Fire District. I'm a past president of the Kent County Medical Society and the Kent Hospital medical staff. A former board member and trustee of Kent Hospital and the Care New England Health System. I'm an advisor to the Office of the Health Insurance Commissioner. I served as chair of the Rhode Island Judicial Nominating Commission and was the first non-attorney to do so. I'm also a survivor of clerical sexual abuse. I highlight my biography tonight in no way to impress. Please don't be. I just want you to know who I am. A regular person who, because of this issue, had his life get off to a rough start and who's simply been trying to improve upon it since. In 1995, at the age of 38, while finishing my medical residency training, I came across this article in a local newspaper. It outlined the conviction and jailing in Ireland of a horrific person, Brendan Smith, a priest in the Catholic Church, a world-class pedophile, and rapist with a record-setting number of offenses. He had been assigned to a Lady of Mercy church and school in East Greenwich during the time I attended school there. I held this paper in my hand. I looked at this photograph and I froze. Physically and mentally, I froze. I took this newspaper to my garage and hid it in a box of old files. At age 38, a grown man, a physician, took this newspaper to his garage and hid it. You see, the child inside of me told me that if I hid this newspaper and no one found it, then bad things must never have happened to me, and I would be okay. But I wasn't okay, and I hadn't been okay for a long, long time. Pandora's box opened. Slowly, Brendan Smith worked his way from the forgotten recesses of my memory up toward the surface where my adult mind could begin to recall and process what was to follow. I began to research him. He was assigned to a Lady of Mercy church between 1965 and 1968. At the time, I was between 8 and 11 years old. I learned that he had a 30-year history of child rape. In the standard Catholic pattern, he had been moved about from parish to parish and then overseas from Ireland to America as his sexual abuse of children was repeatedly discovered. I found this book about him, Betrayal of Trust, by author Chris Moore. As I read through it, as the author chronicled Smith's time in East Greenwich, I honestly thought I was going to turn the page and see my name in print. I thought I was the only one. I went to the local public library and searched the archived issues of the local newspaper on microfiche. There I was shocked, and I'm still shocked, to learn that upon his departure, triggered by his sexual abuse of local children, unknowing Our Lady of Mercy parishioners held a dinner in his honor with hundreds in attendance. The article is in your packet. He was sent off in grand style. His crimes were yet once again hidden from public view by the priest and a complicit bishop. Parishioners were taken as fools as the can was once again kicked down the road. I began to recall the details of my own abuse. I gathered the courage and paid a visit to the Providence Diocese. I met their representative, Father David Thoreau, and notified him that I had been a victim of Brendan Smith. He told me there was only one other complaint against Brendan Smith. I was to learn later that that was an abject, bold-faced lie. In fact, Father Thoreau's brother, also a priest, was the roommate of Brendan Smith at Our Lady of Mercy Church. Yet he assured me that his brother knew nothing of the pedophile's activities. Impossible. I sought out Mitchell Garabedian, a Boston attorney who is expert in the prosecution of the church and its pedophile priests. It was then that I learned that I was far from alone. There were many, many other children who had been abused and raped by Catholic priests. My case was settled in arbitration. At the time, both the judge and my attorney strongly suggested that I seek professional counseling. It was years later that I took their advice and sought out Dr. Ann Webb, who you heard from this evening. Had I not, I would not be sitting here tonight. Quite frankly, she saved my life. I was exposed to this monster when my devout and trusting Catholic parents sent me to Our Lady of Mercy Elementary School as they had my older siblings. While there, Smith would call from his rectory across the street from the school and have the nuns pull me out of my second or third grade classroom. I would wait in the principal's office until he entered and took me across the hall to the nurse's office where he would abuse me. Once done, they would return me to the classroom, sworn to silence, fearing everything around me. As an altar boy, he would molest me in the dressing room next to the altar. And with this, I was expected to learn, develop, and go on to live a normal life. It wasn't normal. I began to miss school for prolonged periods with subjective health issues that could not be proven. I began drinking alcohol in junior high school. I drank way too much alcohol in high school and in my adolescence. It was not until I joined the fire department that my life began to get back on track. Medical school followed. Years of professional counseling have kept me from taking the horrible path that many other child abuse victims find themselves on. Many have taken their own lives. I understand why. I add my voice to the call for change so our children and grandchildren, your children and grandchildren, might escape such organized abuse. Examining this problem scientifically, it's clear that we are faced with two elements of clergy sexual abuse that will not go away. First, pedophilia, and the migration of pedophiles into closed hierarchical societies where they have the opportunity to act. And second, the inherent risk that those in these enslaved societies with power over others may very well abuse that power. Pedophilia exists in nature. It always has. A scholarly article by Tenenberg et al., published in the Journal of Frontiers in Human Neuroscience, 24 June 2015, reports a general prevalence of pedophilia in society of between 1 and 5%. Within a closed society with a power paradigm such as the Catholic Church, the Boy Scouts, private schools, etc., estimates of prevalence approach 7%. That's not going to go away. With respect to the neuroscience of repressed or delayed memory of the trauma-affected child, is well established. Before realizing that I was a living, breathing example of repressed memory, I thought it was hogwash. I thought it was a contrived defense for unworthy litigants seeking financial reward. I now know differently. It was 30 years before my abuse found its way to my consciousness. It was another 15 years before I found the courage to seek help, and that's typical. And that's why this legislation is so important, particularly the window for those who were abused in the past. Plaintiff litigation in these cases have little or nothing to do with money. Rather, it has everything to do with the acceptance that one has been victimized and they are not at fault. Most importantly, it has to do with justice, and that's where you come in. Because pedophilia will not go away, because our children and grandchildren must be protected, and because the Church, including the Diocese of Providence, is fighting tooth and nail to block legislation that protects and provides for their victims. A couple of years ago, I arranged to meet with the current pastor of Our Lady of Mercy Church. He is, in fact, and as you know, also the political lobbyist for the diocese. You see, it had occurred to me that both he and I share a role, a sacred role, in caring for the members of our community. He spiritually as a priest, and myself clinically as a doctor. I'm not alone in that view. Just last week, in testimony before the Vatican Summit, Chilean abuse survivor Juan Carlos Cruz told the bishops, quote, "You are the physicians of the soul, yet, with rare exception, you have been transformed in some cases into murderers of the soul, into murderers of the faith." During our meeting, I expressed my view that in the 1960s we had the equivalent of a public health epidemic pass through our town in the form of a pedophile priest, leaving broken lives in its wake. Confident that there remains any number of victims of Brendan Smith who would benefit from our assistance, I propose that he and I work together, man to man, to find these folks and to help them. He had a diocese attorney with him that day, and needless to say, the idea was not welcomed, and the meeting didn't last very long. Now, while it is true that the sexual abuse of children is not confined to the Catholic Church, it's now clear that a significant number of priests have sexually abused an astonishing large number of children, and the revelations continue to grow. The findings of attorneys general throughout our country and reports from around the world form the inescapable conclusion that the Catholic Church, including the Diocese of Providence, has effectively run a child sex ring for decades, if not generations. In his recent My Turn letter to the Providence Journal, the diocese priest lobbyist Bernard Healy commented on this upcoming legislative session and how he thought it best to provide justice for victims of their abuse. He comments, and I quote, "We welcome the opportunity to engage in the process in a respectful, constructive way that seeks an approach that is fair and just." That's the equivalent of Al Capone welcoming the opportunity to influence gun crime legislation. The premise is absurd on its face. The church is the crime organization here, and they have no place negotiating with legislators regarding the punishments for their crimes. Their priests have committed decades of child rape, and they expect a hand in making law to protect their organization. Don't let that happen. Imagine, for example, if this were any other organization, a utility, a hospital, a group home organization, a college athletic program, the American Medical Association, for that matter, whose members had committed serial child rape for decades and then worked to cover it up. Is the diocese to be viewed differently because of their influence on our upbringing, their hand in our education, or their threats of reprisal against devout lawmakers who oppose them? The priest lobbyist indicated that the diocese wants to engage in the process in a respectful way. He's the same lobbyist who, despite agreement and assurances between legislative leaders, effectively had the bill killed in the final hour of the last legislative session. And the same person who would not join us in finding and helping the victims of Brendan Smith. The effort the church is making to refute these findings is disgraceful, and the effort of the Diocese of Providence has put forth to defeat this bill is suspect. However, the systematic rape of children and the cover-up that follows is criminal and unforgivable. It represents a betrayal of the highest order. For those of us here in support, it's about protecting children. For the diocese, it's about protecting themselves. When Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Upon this rock I build my church," could he ever have imagined what lay before us today? What his church has become. For nowhere in the lessons and teachings of Jesus Christ did he ever say that it's okay for men in collars to rape kids. In closing, please weigh the body of this testimony thoughtfully, as I know you will. In the end, I ask that you approve this bill and pass it and move it to the full House for their consideration. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for your time.